Good evening all, and welcome. Distant memories indeed of the workplace, as many of us I'm sure are now working from home. But for those of you who aren't, or those of you who remember, it's time for us to embrace the horror of the workplace. It is also my pleasure to invite into this video our collaborator, the very talented Mr. Spook, who I strongly suggest you check out at the end of this video. Links will be in the description and at the end. So without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. For reference, I work as a barista in a coffee shop inside a larger store. I am one of a handful of male baristas at my shop. I am gay and very open about this. I wear pride shoes, I have a pride flag attached to my name tag, and I have a couple of wristbands with rainbows and phrases like Orlando Strong and a local LGBT+ center. So the other day I was working my shift at the register. A gentleman comes up to me and smiles. I think he noticed the pride flag on my name tag, but he didn't explicitly mention it at first. He says he doesn't know what to order and asks me for my opinion. Now, I'm not particularly a coffee drinker, but I know what drink fits what tastes, so I ask him what he likes and try to give him recommendations. As I'm talking, I can tell he's paying more attention to me than what I'm saying, which I'm completely okay with. He was a shorter but well-built man, had beautiful eyes, a nice beard, and basically pretty nice looking. Eventually he decides on a super sweet iced drink that we have, and I go make it for him. As I'm preparing the drink, one of my co-workers leans over and whispers, "I think the customer just took a picture of you." That was a bit of a red flag, but I thanked her and kind of brushed it off. I gave him his drink, and he smiles. He points to the pride flag and says, "I love that flag. Where can I get one of those?" I laugh and said I got it from a pride event I went to a few years ago. He then says, "And where can I get the person it's attached to?" I immediately felt a rush and started blushing, but trying to act professional, I brush it off. He eventually takes his drink and sits on one of the tables. I continue going on about my day, debating whether I should give in to this guy or not. Every now and then I would glance at his table to see him looking at me. No matter when I looked, it seemed like he was always staring. I started to get that weird feeling of heart eyes with red flags. Then I notice he hasn't taken a single sip of his coffee. Remember, it was a nice drink, so I could see through the clear plastic cup. When I have a break, I go to wipe down some tables. I stop by his table and ask if he didn't like the drink, and if not, I could make him a new one free of charge. He hands me the drink and mentions he's not too sure if it's too sweet for him or not, and asks me to try it. I politely decline, telling him I don't drink coffee. He's shocked and asks me why I'm working here. As we're talking though, his questions start to change. "So, do you lift at all?" "No, not really." "Well, how much do you think you could lift if you had to?" "The job requirement is £50, so I guess at least that much?" "Well, I've learnt it's good to be able to at least lift half of your body weight. How much do you weigh?" Immediately red flags go off. There was something about the combination of the drink and the two questions that made me feel like I was being asked how much of a fight I'd be able to hold, especially if I were drugged. I've been drugged at a party before, and these things are red flags that I have learnt to pick up on. So I kindly and quickly end the conversation and go back to cleaning up tables. As the hours go by, he continues to sit there, not drinking his drink. Other employees and a couple of managers ask if everything's okay, and he says he's perfectly happy. Every now and then he takes a phone call, and at one point, I swear I see a guy on his phone at a different part of the store talking opposite of the guy at the table. Suddenly I start to feel like there are more eyes on me than I realize. I pull one of my managers to the back and tell him I'm getting weirder and weirder feelings about the guy, and the manager says she'll keep an eye on him. Now, I was closing on this shift, and so as we get closer to closing time, I notice he's still there. When the announcement that the store is closing in half an hour is made, he comes up to the counter and asks if he could walk me to my car after I get off. I tell him our closing duties take at least 45 minutes after we close, and he says he'd be happy to wait. I politely decline when he asks when I work next. I tell him I'm off for a few weeks. Well, then I feel I should walk you to your car, especially if I might not be able to see you for a few weeks. No way. I politely decline, and eventually he leaves. I finish my closing duties and head out the employee area. As soon as I get down there, I tell one of my managers about the situation and ask if I can take the side exit from the store. Because at our store, we exit out one of the main doors after we close, but there's a side door that we use to get into the building before we open, and that the managers use to get out after we close. He agrees and tells me he'd walk me to my car to make sure I'm okay if I'm cool with waiting a little, and I am. So I walk out the side door with a few managers and get into my car, and as I'm driving away, I see a large van with extremely tinted windows parked in front of the front door. There's no way to know for sure if my customer was in that van, if it was as ominous as I thought it was, but I know that I was not about to stay and figure it out, and I took a long and winding path home that very night. So to the very hot guy that I sold coffee to, let's not meet again.
My fiance and I threw a dinner party one time to celebrate his mom completing chemo. I hired a caterer. We were expecting 25 friends and family, so it was more than the kitchenette of our single-story ranch house could handle. We'd also only just moved in, so didn't have a lot of cooking staples. The caterer said he'd bring everything 75% done, but he needed to finish off some dishes in our kitchen. I told him that was fine, as long as he was finished by 5 because the kitchen is centrally located and we'd prefer everything to be finished before the guest arrived due to the intimate nature of the occasion. He said that would be fine. He arrives as scheduled at 12 p.m. We gave him until 5 and the guests aren't even arriving until 6, so it's plenty of time. He smelled like actual dog doo-doo, but his accent sounded European, so I thought maybe he just didn't believe in deodorant. It was more than a sweat smell though. It smelled like a sun-baked diaper, and that made me uneasy because he was going to be preparing food for sick prior and young kids. I just made sure he washed his hands and then left him to his own devices, worrying I was being presumptuous. Throughout the entire process, he keeps pulling me aside to ask me questions and have me taste things. I was super busy because my husband had to work during the day and pick up the surprise guest right after. So setting up the deck, decorating, putting together the slideshow equipment, coordinating the surprise guest, and just a million other little details. So every 10 minutes being asked things like, do you prefer this with paprika or without? With is fine, whatever you think, taste it to be sure. It was getting old. When he was still there at 5:45 and after 2 gentle reminders, I flat out told him I needed him completely out by 6, no matter what. He apologized and said there had been a delay because the oven wouldn't stay up to temperature. I never had a problem with our oven, but I figured he's the professional. Maybe it was a subtle problem. A little before 6 rolls around, a few of our friends start trickling in. I decided to tell him whatever's done is done, and whatever isn't, he should put in the fridge, but he's nowhere to be found. I go out on the deck to ask my friends if they've seen him, and he's out there, alcohol beverage in hand, out of his chef whites and now in a t-shirt and jeans, mingling with my friends. I walked out just in time for him to introduce himself to my cousin-in-law as a good friend of mine. Nope, too weird for me. I met him in person for the first time barely 6 hours ago. I told him he needed to leave, now. So he goes inside to get his bag and makes a beeline for my bedroom. I'm taken aback. I say, "Excuse me? What are you doing?" And he says, "To change." So first of all, we have a guest bathroom clearly visible. Second, why can't he wear a t-shirt and jeans home? I tell him I'm not comfortable with him going in my room, but he insists it'll only be a second and goes in and shuts and locks the door. I couldn't even get a word out before he went in and felt helpless. I was going outside to ask one of my friends to help me usher him out, but at that point, my fiance got there with my aunt-in-law. I had to explain the situation to him, nearly in tears at that point, and he was like, "What? He went in the bedroom? Why?" So he pounded on the door, and the caterer came out, still in a t-shirt and jeans, and my fiance said, "You shouldn't be in there. You have to leave." And the caterer said, "Excuse me, but this is not your house. It is not up to you to decide." And my 6'4", 260-pound fiance tells him, "Yes, actually, it is his house," and puts a hand on his back and guides him to the door. The caterer says, "I thought Frantic Sledder lived here." And he says, "Yes, my fiance lives here with me." And the caterer goes nuts. He turns to me and screams, "You lied to me." I have no clue what he's talking about. He starts yelling about how I led him on. I don't know who he thought the man in the pictures with me around the house was. So my fiance says, "Oh no, you won't talk that way in my house. Find the door." And the caterer goes in the kitchen and starts throwing the trays of food out of the refrigerator and on the floor. At that point, my fiance realized two of his brothers had come in and were on the deck. He signaled to them and they came inside, and he basically said, "This guy is harassing Frantic Sledder." Since they're a family of all boys and my fiance is the first to get married, they don't get to flex their protective muscles too often, and jumped at the chance to toss this guy out. The party then went on as planned, but I insisted we just ordered pizza and threw out all the food he made. My fiance and friends kept saying, "Isn't that a bit much?" But I was insistent. We went out late drinking with his brothers and got home around 3:30 a.m. and passed out in our room. At around 5 a.m., I was woken up to the sound of the door opening. I figured either we forgot to lock the door in our drunken stupor and it blew open, or one of his family members forgot their keys or something in the house and didn't want to wake us. But his parents never, ever let themselves in when they know we're home, and his brothers had even more than we did and was definitely not awake and driving around 5 a.m. It wasn't nearly windy enough for the door to have blown open. It had been tranquil all night. So I wake my fiance and whisper, "Someone just came in the house." And he said the same thing. Probably my brother left his wallet or something. I figure I'm being paranoid and try to put it to rest when I hear a loud crash sound. With that, my fiance was up and on his feet in one movement. He told me to lock myself in the closet and call 911 while he went and looked around. As I was pulling out my phone, we hear in that distinct accent, "Frantic Sledder, hello." And I realize it's just this insane caterer. I'm not worried about this caterer physically overpowering my fiance, or me for the matter, so I charge right out there. The caterer is shirtless and clearly on something. He's taking the pictures that are of just me off the wall and holding several in his arms already. He lunges towards me when he sees me. My fiance gets between me and him, and I call 911. Fiance tells him cops have been called and it is in his best interest to get off the property. The caterer says, "No, I have to make sure Frantic Sledder is okay." And I say, "What? Why wouldn't I be okay?" And my fiance rightfully says not to engage with him and feed into it. My fiance stays between me and him while I climb out a window. He watches as the caterer throws photos of us on the floor. He's begun to destroy our kitchen at this point, and when the cops come in, he has a butcher knife. My fiance considered going for the gun safe when he first got the knife since we live in a stand-your-ground state, but he decided the situation was hectic enough without introducing a firearm. Caterer doesn't obey police orders to drop his weapon, and he says he isn't leaving without me, so they tase him. It's lucky for him he only got tased, and he didn't antagonize my husband into squashing him. As he's let out in cuffs, he's shouting how he and I are in love, and it figures I chose a macho thug over a sweet, sensitive artist like him. He continues on as the police read his rights. The police ask us to do inventory on the house and see if anything's missing or damaged besides what we witnessed him do. We go around and there's nothing, but then I remember he was in our room yesterday and go through the room. All my panties from the dirty laundry hamper were gone and my toy had been moved from where I keep it. We were so freaked out in the aftermath that we replaced all our kitchenware, toothbrushes, sent our sheets to be professionally cleaned, and had a cleaning crew do a deep cleaning on the whole house. He sent me a letter from prison that thankfully my husband intercepted because I was still recovering from the whole thing. We gave it to the police, who helped us get issued a no-contact order. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison 5 years ago, so he's out by now, but thankfully we did not meet.
This story is a few years old, but I remember it pretty well. When I was about 19 years old, I got hired in the fashion department of a local supercenter store. It's a bit like Walmart, but it's exclusive to the Midwest. At the time, I had the sides and back of my hair shaved, and the top of my hair was bleached blonde and twisted into a high bun. This is relevant to the story. I had just finished my computer training 2 days earlier and was on the floor alone stocking some baby clothes. About a box or two into my stocking, an announcement came over the speakers that informed customers our credit card readers were down, but we would be able to take cash at this time. I heard a couple of groans around me, but it seemed like most everyone was content to just go on shopping until it was announced that card readers were back up. I crouched down to grab some more clothes out of a box to shelve them, when a guy walked up to me holding a few items in his hand. "Hey miss, I just have a few items I wanted to buy real quick. Do you know how long the card readers will be down?" Me, still crouched on the floor. I'm not sure. I don't think this happens very often, but they say that they could still take cash for now. I only have card on me. Damn, that sucks. I'm sorry about that. Is there anything I can help you with while you need to wait? Nah, I guess I'll just hang around. I can stick over here and just bother you. I don't really respond to this comment, and just nodded and got back to folding. The man asked me a few more random questions before he started getting pretty creepy. The guy starts walking a bit closer to me, and he's at least a foot taller than I am. "So, why do you have your hair like that all bleached on top?" "Oh, I just like the way it looks." "No, that's not it. You're doing it for the attention." "Nope, I honestly just like the way it looks. Plus, the shaved parts keep me cooler in the summer." "What? Your family doesn't give you enough attention? You don't get enough attention from boys?" I don't know, I just like my hair like this." "Alright, well since you want attention so bad, how about I wait until you get off work, and I can show you the kind of attention I think you deserve." At this point in the conversation, he's practically hovering over me. I think I looked really intimidated because a woman immediately ran over to the two of us when she heard him say that. She quickly pulled me away, telling me that she needed help getting an item down from a high shelf. I'm not sure if the woman was genuinely trying to save me or really did just need help reaching something. I spoke to my manager about the event later in the day, and she informed me that there's nothing she can do for customers like that, and that I'll just have to deal with it. When I got off work that night, I practically ran to my car, praying that the guy wasn't waiting for me. I didn't stick around long enough to see if he was. I'd quit pretty soon after this because I was so shaken. I have no idea what he would have planned for me, but I'm so thankful for that woman. So, guy who thinks I deserve your creepy attention, let's not meet.
I was doing my second year of my degree, so I worked at a well-known fast food place. I was pretty good at my job. Not that it was difficult to be bad at it. I started off doing day shifts, which is when most of the staff worked. Places like that are like a revolving door, employment-wise. I worked there for 7 months and I may as well have been a lifer. While working there, I worked alongside Frank. Frank was older than me. He had a pleasant-ish demeanor most of the time, but the dude was not smart. He constantly did things wrong and was absolutely frustrating all of the time. More than that though, he was just kind of weird. He just did weird stuff that didn't make any sense to anyone at all. Because of this, I barely spoke to him unless I absolutely had to, and I wasn't at all bummed out when they decided to fire him. As far as I knew, that would be the last I ever saw of him, and I was pretty indifferent about it. A few months went on, and I was eventually moved to the morning shift. It stunk, but it meant I had afternoons free most of the time, which meant I could get ahead with uni work. I generally only worked weekends, and any weekend that I didn't have any university. At the time the story happened, I already found a new job, and I was on my final day of working for the fast food place. I actually had my first shift at the new place at 4 p.m. that day, and wasn't planning to work, but my manager begged me to train the new girl, and I agreed. I'd still have a couple of hours to change and nap after my shift, so it was no big deal. The day fell on a Wednesday, which I never usually worked, and I wasn't rota on to work it. That's important to remember. So I get to the store at 5 a.m., start training the new girl as usual. Everything is going pretty chill and as per usual, up until about 7 a.m. I look over the counter and see a familiar face. There was a line of customers, but he wasn't standing in it, more next to it. I gave a brief, "Hi Frank," and turned back to what I was doing. We weren't friends and he had never spoken, and I hadn't seen him in about 6 months, so I didn't want to give him any more of my time. The dude kept lingering there though. He asked me how I was, and I said fine, and I asked him it back. He said he'd found a new job, and I sort of nodded, but I was serving customers, and to be honest, I didn't really want to keep up conversation. And then the weird stuff really began. He asked me if I wanted to hang out sometime, to which I snorted and said no. The woman I was serving gave me an amused smile, which I returned. Frank wasn't sated though. He asked again, and when I said no, he asked why. I said I had a partner, and that I was busy, so no. He asked what I was busy with. I said I was going to my hometown. He asked what was there, and why I was going. Frustrated, I told him that I was busy, and that I needed to get back to work. It's been a couple of years, and honestly, it was really traumatic, so I don't remember fully what happened next. What I do remember is that suddenly, this guy was acting really weird. He was staring at me with wide eyes, like he didn't know what was going on. He walked around to the employee door and tried to go in, at which point I ran over and held my hands up to him. I told him he couldn't come back there, and that he had to leave. The dude is sweating by now and staring at me. He sort of mumbles something, sounding like he's agreeing with me, and even steps back a little. I tell him that he has to leave, that he has to go. One of the other customers sees this and says firmly, "Are you leaving, mate?" To which Frank nods, but makes no move to actually go. He's just standing there, shaking. The problem with working in crappy places is that nothing works, so the employee door didn't lock. I closed the door anyway, and moved back so I wasn't on the stairs to the office, so I could see the security camera feed. I look at the feed from one point at the employee door and see that he's just standing there at the door, unmoving. Meanwhile, the new girl is still serving customers, by the way. I'm really scared, so I text my manager, who tells me she's on her way in any way, and just to hold tight. He's still standing there, so I ask her if it's okay if I head to the office, which she says is fine. It's not too busy, and honestly, I wouldn't care if it was, so I head up the stairs to the office. Just as I get there, I hear the voice of the new girl shouting, "Wait, stop, you can't go up there." And holy cow. I turn around and see Frank dazed out of his mind, coming up the stairs towards me. His eyes are wild and he looks out of it. Once again, I hold up my hands and tell him to leave, but this time, he seems completely incapable of listening. He just keeps walking towards me. I text my manager in all caps, he's upstairs. Remember what I said about working in a crappy place? Nothing ever works, which meant the door to the office didn't lock. As he approached me, I slammed the door shut and pressed my back up against it. I was hoping that because he seemed so strung out, he would just leave, but he didn't. Dude starts pushing on the door, grunting and moaning, and I'm like, I'm 100% in a horror movie. At this point, I just nope out of there and call the police. I'm screaming on the phone to this girl, shaking like crazy. I've never had to call any sort of emergency services before or since, so the whole thing was just terrifying to me. And bear in mind, he's still pushing on the door as I'm doing all this. She's asking me if I know what he wants or if he has a weapon, and it dawns on me that I have no idea. As soon as the dispatch girl hangs up, I hear my manager's voice talking very firmly and sternly to Frank. From what I can tell, he sounds like he's sort of responding to her. I call that I've called the police, but I don't move from the door. I hear the police soon enough, and they convince him to come downstairs. As he's going, he asks softly, "Can Blake come?" At this point, I'm screaming because that was my last straw. Soon enough, a police officer knocks on the door and tells me they've taken him outside. He comes in and takes my statement. He tells me that all they could do is let him go, since he didn't break the law. They said he didn't seem to be on drugs either. I'm scared, but I'm sort of just glad he's gone. You'd think that's where the ordeal ends, but apparently Frank had a little prequel in mind for me. After this whole thing, I grab my phone to text my partner, and I notice I got a new email. I check it, and it's from about 6:30 that morning from Frank. I don't remember all that was said, but it was essentially saying hello, asking how I was. He asked in the email if I'd like to go out sometime, and that I had a great impact on his life. What the heck? I show my manager, and she guesses that he got my email from one of the email threads she used to send with the rotas attached. Remember earlier though, how I said I hadn't been rotaed to work this day? How I never worked Wednesdays? That he left before I started the earlier shifts? There was, in theory, no way he would know I would be there, and yet he did. I passed this info on to the police, who told me they still couldn't do anything, but that if I ever saw him in public again, to call them. I called my new workplace and very briefly explained the situation. They were very nice and said I didn't have to come in, and that they hoped I was okay. My partner brought me home and helped me calm down while I sat, terrified and paranoid in my bed, until I eventually made my way back to my mom's place, which was far enough away that I felt safe. I eventually moved out of town, but only 2 months ago. Up until then, I still saw him everywhere I went, and feared what would happen if he ever saw me. Thankfully, up until now, he never has.
This is a story that happened to a girl I dated. She used to work at a home improvement store, and there was this middle-aged guy who used to come in regularly and hang around the store and talk to her. He seemed a little slow and clingy, but harmless. He would always address her by name and say that she was pretty. This one day he was in the store as they were closing, and he witnessed a male co-worker give her a hug before he left. The next day, that male co-worker finds his tires slashed in his driveway. No one made any connection to the nice middle-aged guy who came in to buy batteries 5 times a week. Meanwhile, this girl had been noticing that she was always losing underwear at home. She assumed that she had been losing them in the wash or simply misplaced them, and thought nothing of it, and even joked about it with her mum. Then it happened. She was sleeping one night and woke up to find this guy standing silently over her bed, staring down at her with her panties pressed against his face. She flipped and ran out the sliding glass door on the back of the house, the same unlocked door that, as they found, was where he'd been going in. He'd been using that door to get in at night for months, to watch her sleep and play with her underwear.
I was 16 when this happened, and I was in excellent physical shape. The diner I worked at was on the side of a road and was next to a gas station that we shared parking lots with. The diner had an odd setup to get to the back bins. In the storeroom, you had to go through a big metal door that was at the back of the kitchen. The diner I worked at also had a fresh produce supplier that delivered most days early in the morning, and they had a new delivery boy. Billy had been with them around 2 months. He was a hot topic between the female employees, as he was extremely good looking, but seemed to be a loner. I don't know for sure, but I think he was around 18 or 19. I'd spoken to him before, and he asked me for my number once I politely said I don't give it out. I was 3 months into my first paying job at a local diner working as a waitress when this happened. And on this particular day, I was asked to stay and work the night shift with a female colleague that I was familiar with. I didn't mind as I saw it as an opportunity for extra cash. It was around 12:30 a.m. when the last family eating left the diner, so it was up to me and the other waitress Ashley and chef Mike to clean and lock the place up as the owners were on vacation. I decided to take the trash to the bin out back as I was too tired to do anything else like sweep up or clean tables. To this day, I regret being lazy. To get to the back bins, you have to go through the kitchen and then through a big heavy metal door, which I was okay about doing as I've done it many times before. But once I got out, I forgot the hinge where the door clips to the wall was broken, and it slipped and closed naturally. I was angry as I have to walk around the whole diner to get back in through the front door. As I stretched up to throw the bag in the bin, I heard a noise. It sounded like a grunt. It kind of spooked me, but I put it down to my imagination. But then I heard it again, and it was coming from the storeroom. Me being my Dora the Explorer self poked my head into the storeroom, and at the beginning, I saw nothing. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught something moving very slowly towards me, and as my eyes adjusted, it was Billy, the grocery boy, and he was holding his trainers in one hand. Once he saw I noticed him, he froze. I was trying to think through every logical explanation for why he would be in the storeroom at this time, but I got interrupted by Billy, stuttering. I'm just putting your delivery in here. My van broke down, that's why I'm so late." This frightened me to the core, as my boss told me she had not made any orders as we needed to use up old stock first. And then it clicked. He had no shoes on. He was trying to sneak up on me. We just stared at each other, and I muttered, "Oh, that's okay. I'm gonna go inside now. Shut the door when you're done." As I felt if I questioned why he was there, he would get hostile and the situation for me would become even worse. I proceeded to back away, still facing him, until I was near the gate that opened into the car park. The kitchen doors shut silly. He laughed slightly. I've never felt so patronized in my life. He was talking to me as if I was a little child that he corrected. "Oh yeah, ha ha ha. Looks like I'll have to go the long way." I joked about it as I could feel my situation getting worse. He just had that expression that reminded me of that cat from Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, just shut the door when you're done. Bye." I shouted out before turning around and opening the gate. My whole body froze when I felt a vice grip on my wrist. By instinct, I started tugging my arm away and shouted at him something like, "Dude, get off me." But that only seemed to make it worse. It was almost like he loved to see me struggle. "Stop resisting me," he said in a flat tone as he used his other hand to try and pull my skirt down. I think all my fear turned into fight as I began kicking and punching the right side of his face. I think I poked him in the eye with one of the fake nails I had on, and he instantly let go and started cussing very loud. I took my chance and bolted out of the gate and into the car park, which was empty apart from one car parked in the gas station at a pump. I looked closer and saw it was occupied before I ran towards it. I looked back at the gate and saw Billy running straight at me, calling me and shouting things like, "I knew you were a bad girl," and "Get back here." The loud shouting seemed to get the attention of the car owners, and to my surprise, it was the family that had left 10 minutes before. Once I reached the car, they were all standing outside and looked confused, until they saw Billy running towards us all. The father and the son stood in front of me and told him to calm down, or they'll call the cops. This just seemed to make Billy worse. He started hissing at them, and he jumped at me, but before he could grab me, the father grabbed him and pushed him so hard he fell to the ground. We all just stared at him while he got up off the floor and dusted himself off. You really should have given me your number. He was just nodding his head at me like he was scolding a child. All the fear I was keeping in just came out. I began sobbing hysterically into the mother's chest. The older brother started to yell at Billy and pushed him away from us all. I like the way you fight me. He smirked at me, turned around, and started walking towards the road, the brother following him to make sure he left. When the cops arrived, we went into the diner and I gave a full statement, and so did the family. It turns out that Ashley and Mike were cleaning with the radio on full volume, so they couldn't hear me screaming. When my boss came back, he was told everything by the police, and now we have a new supplier. The kitchen door hinge is now fixed, and I no longer take the trash out at night. As we knew all of Billy's employers, the police paid them a visit, only to be told he quit 2 weeks prior, and the address he had given them was a block of abandoned apartments, and his number was disconnected, so nothing ever came of the police report. I'm now dating the oldest brother of the diner family. I'm so thankful that they were there that night, because I know I couldn't have outrun Billy to the entrance of the diner.
I work at GameStop. It's a great job and I'm surrounded by everything that I enjoy. Games, anime, etc. I've been told that I'm attractive. I'm not saying this to be conceited, it just makes the story make more sense. And I've been told from my manager that it's why he hired me, because a large percentage of our customers are male. I mainly work on the registers. This job consists of greeting people when they walk in and of course working the register. It was getting close to closing time and I was the only one up front at this time. I was getting started with my closing duties when I heard the buzzer go off when the doors open. Without looking, I welcomed the customer. "Hi, welcome to GameStop. Let me know if there's anything I can help you find." Normally I get a hello or they respond with a question, but it was silent. I look up from behind the counter and see the man that just entered the door looking at me. But once my eyes met his, he looked away and started looking at the games on the shelves. I shrug it off. It's normal for male customers not to greet me because they think because I'm female I don't have valid knowledge about games, and I continue with my closing duties. I'm bent behind the counter when I feel someone standing on the other side. It's the man. He puts the games on the counter and says nothing. I grab his games from the drawers, and then I proceed with the normal questions we ask. Did you find everything alright? Do you have a phone number with us? Do you want us to protect this game for you? My questions get met with silence, and all he does is stare. I turn my attention back to the register, and while finishing up the transaction, I can feel his eyes digging into the side of my head. I print out his receipt and put his games in a bag, and he takes it and turns around to leave. Again, I shrug this interaction off, as it's not out of the ordinary for me. It's almost time for me to pull down the gates and lock up when I get a call. I groan because I think it's a customer trying to wiggle their way in before we close, and I pick up the phone to hear heavy breathing. Hi, thanks for calling GameStop. This is Amber, how may I help you? I was just inside buying some games. Oh, was something wrong with the purchase? No, I'm just calling to let you know that I received your signals. At this point I'm very confused because I treated him like any other customer. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I'm calling you to let you know I picked up on your signals. I know I should have hung up at this point, but I was curious to what he was referring to. You are very beautiful, and your signals were received. When do you get off? I'll be waiting. At this point in the conversation, I hung up, rushed forward, closed the gates, and locked up the store. I went into the back and told my manager about the phone call, and he said after I finished closing up, she would take me home, because my apartment complex is very close, so I walk. As I was quickly replacing the trash bags, I saw a car pull up in front of the store and park. No one gets out. Fortunately, my manager parked out back and we left via the back door. I never saw the guy again, but every time I walk home I think about that one particular customer.
This took place about 4 years ago, when I was still in college. So I want to preference by saying I didn't always make the smartest choices, but I have learned better now. I would not recommend anyone doing what I did. Around that time, I was doing acting jobs on the side for fun and was part of a Facebook group that covered the whole state. This was my main source to find any auditions before I had an agent. One night, I was scrolling the page and saw there was an audition for this action film. I had never heard of the production company, but that was pretty common as many college students would also use the page with a made-up production company name. Me being a person who couldn't resist auditioning for everything at the time, sent the director a message with my headshots. It took about 30 minutes for him to respond. I would like to note that it was 1 a.m. when I sent the message. I, being naive, thought this was normal. He asked if he could call me, and I gave my number. Minutes later, he called, introducing himself as Eric. He explained the plot and told me the role I would play, which completely threw me off guard because at the time, I hadn't done many notable things for someone just to give me a role. I wish I had seen the red flags, but instead, I let it get much worse. During this time, I learned that Eric taught classes on a military base nearby, and this film was loosely based on his 30 years in that field. I thought that was cool and realized that this wasn't some college project. Then the conversation took a turn as he started to focus on my headshots I had sent. He kept saying that I was so pretty and that I'd fit in well in his other business. He kept the focus there, even when I tried to ask more about my part. When I asked him what that business was, he refused to elaborate, saying that I'd need to fill out some paperwork first as people had tried to ruin him in the past. I was apparently blind to the red flags that were directly in front of my face, and signed all of the paperwork because I was way too nosy. Looking back, those documents probably weren't legal. I sent them back to him, and he said I would hear from one of his partners, Karen. He also set up a time to meet later that day around 7 p.m. and had me write down an address. I wasn't from the area, so I didn't know where it was and figured I would just look it up later that day. 10 minutes later, I get a call from Karen. She sounded nice and spoke highly of Eric. She told me she was excited that I was going to join the project and asked if I wanted to know about their other business. I told her yes, and she started talking. So, he had the production company that made film and another that made porn. She told me that I would be a great fit and would love to have me on the team. I flat out rejected her offer. She tried to make me budge by telling me that their company was really popular, but I wanted no part of it. She kept trying to get my opinion on really disgusting things that I won't mention because it gave me nightmares for the longest time. I could tell Karen was getting pretty frustrated that I wasn't going to break. She soon ended the call by going on about how excited she was that I was going to be in the one film. Most people would have cut ties with this by now, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself driving to the location Eric had me write down. I knew it was a bad idea, but I just wanted to know. It was getting pretty dark by the time I was close, and I wasn't familiar with the area at all. When I finally arrived, I saw this rundown church with a single white truck in the parking lot. Finally, I talked myself out of the situation and turned around. I paused on the street next to the parking lot and quickly texted Eric. I told him that I did not feel comfortable and would not be taking part in his project. Right before I took off, I glanced at the church and saw a figure of a very large man standing in the dark lobby. I practically floored it at this point and went straight back to my dorm. When I got back, I had a new message from him saying, "I see you again. Don't be scared." I never heard from him again, but to this day, I'm insanely paranoid that he'll find me. I still live in the same town, but I have moved a lot since then. Occasionally, I'll get a friend request from people who have his production company in their job description, but I quickly block them. I don't know what would have happened if I had gone into the building that night or if I had played into Karen's hands, but I'm happy to be here, and that's what really matters. So Eric, let's never meet again.
This happened about a month ago, when I was working at a store called Box Lunch. It was on the upper level of this mall. I'm a 16-year-old dude and had worked there for about 6 months before this event occurred. I was working the late shift, which was from 6 to 9 p.m. that day. The store closed at 9, and that's when I would lock up and leave. I was working with one other person that night called May. She was my age, maybe a month older, and she was a super fun person to hang out with and work with. She was chill and not super talkative, which was great because I'm not talkative either. We went to the same high school and kind of knew each other and got along easily. I would even pick her up sometimes to go to work if we were working the same shift. Side note, not related to the story, but I think May liked me, and I kinda hoped so because I really liked her. Anyway, we were both behind the counter just talking and laughing. May I remind you that there was barely anyone in the small mall because it was late, so that left me and May alone in the store for a while. As we were talking, this skinny man wearing a train conductor hat walks into the store. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s or older. He was wearing this dirty green jacket and badly ripped jeans. This dude looked like he was homeless, but I didn't want to assume anything. May greeted him with a smile, and he didn't pay any attention to her, just kept walking through the store. We kind of looked at each other, sort of with a, yikes, what's up with this guy look. As he was looking through the store, I kept an eye on him to make sure he wouldn't try to steal anything. I didn't see him do this, but he kept talking to himself and glancing back at May and I. I was getting weird vibes from him. After about 15 minutes, he walked up to the counter, placed a Terminator Funko Pop on the counter, and I asked him the usual cashier questions, which he didn't answer in any way. He wasn't even looking at me. He kept glancing at May, who was messing around on the computer. I don't think she noticed. I rang up his total, and he pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and handed it to me. He took the Funko Pop and left, no receipt and no change. He walked out, and that was the end of that. May and I had just talked about the guy and what happened. Some chills, some laughs, and before we knew it, our shift was over and we began to lock up. We walked out to my car in the parking lot. We talked, and it felt like any other regular day, where I drive her home and see her the next time we work. But this wasn't the same. When we got pretty close to my car, May noticed there was something on the hood. I didn't see it at first because it looked small from where we were standing. When we came up to the car, I realized what it was, and my heart sank, as did hers. It was the Terminator figurine the weird man bought from the store. I picked it up and looked at it. May was freaking out and looked all around the parking lot to try and find the man. It didn't make any sense to me how this guy could know which car was mine. I looked up and joined May in looking around the parking lot. Then I noticed that same man standing under one of the street lamps in front of me. It was like something out of a movie, because once he saw me, he began to walk towards us. I told May to get into the car and she didn't object. We got into the car and I left the parking lot as fast as my car could go. We were both freaked out and were trying to figure out what just happened to drive to her house. Over the next few weeks or so, we talked about it at school, at work, and to each other. We never told anyone else because they probably wouldn't have believed us.
So a short backstory. My older brother worked for his now ex-girlfriend's dad as a janitor. He was 19 and I recently turned 17. His girlfriend was in my classes and I asked her dad to hire me. This job was a contracted job. So we go to this business and clean their bathrooms, cafeterias, kitchenettes, and take out the cubicle trash. There were about 4 different buildings all belonging to this one business, so I rarely saw my brother, who was constantly at the main building. Eventually, I was moved to the main building where my brother and I worked together. I made sure to be an annoying little sister at times, so he didn't like to work in the same area with me, but we would work with our coworkers in the bigger areas together, like the cafeteria. One of our coworkers was around 45 and her son was a grade younger than me. We were the only two working at another building together before moving to the main building. When we had breaks, she would offer me a cigarette every now and then. I always accepted, as I smoked prior but had quit when my dad found them and made me throw them out. Now the story begins. There was a man about 58 years old who worked at the main building in the production area. There were only 2 bathrooms, a small office, and a trash compactor, so I rarely went there. The production area and the main hallway to go outside was connected by the cafeteria. One day, while we were cleaning the cafeteria, I was vacuuming the rugs when Bob came up from behind me and poked my sides. This obviously scared me, as my brother was in front of me cleaning the counters. He started laughing about how high I jumped from randomly being touched. I turned around and it was Bob. He was laughing as well. I thought it was odd, but since my brother was laughing, I brushed it off. I can't remember exactly how it all started, but I think that was it. Bob kept badgering me about friending him on Facebook. I kept saying that I forgot and would add him that night, but never did until I eventually got annoyed and just added him. He would text me every weekend asking how I was and what I was doing and when the next day I worked would be. I didn't see anything wrong at first, so I replied. Bob would go on smoke breaks with Lisa. I would join them because they would offer me cigs and I couldn't buy them anymore out of fear that my dad would find them. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on our smoke breaks. We would small talk about our days and such. Lisa had a boyfriend and things were pretty rough between them. This all happened in a span of a year, so the timeline is a bit blurry. At one point, Lisa stopped going on smoke breaks with me and Bob. I learned Bob's break schedule and would stop working just to go out and smoke with him. By this point, I was addicted to cigs again. I didn't tell Bob, but I only talked to him so that he would give me free smokes. Bob would say things to me like, "I'm basically your dad. We get along so well." He once said I looked like his 20-something daughter, and people here think we were father and daughter. But the worst thing he said was, someone asked if we were dating or related, and I told them it's none of their business. I had a boyfriend that he knew about, so that upset me a lot. I didn't try to correct him because I was afraid that my free cigs would stop. When winter came around, we would smoke in Bob's car. He always started his car, so we would have heat, but a few times he put the car in drive and drove around the parking lot. I didn't panic, but I made sure I had an escape plan. Plus my brother would know where I was and would get worried if I never returned. Bob also called everyone pet names like Honey, Princess, and such, so I never thought anything of it when he called me them. He once even commented on my profile picture, "Very beautiful princess." As in Bob's mind, he was my father figure. He also thought that Lisa was my mother figure. I have great, loving parents at home, so I never looked at any other adult as parental figures. He would tell Lisa and I he wanted to take us out to eat, and we could drink at his apartment afterwards. Basically a family night. We would mention that it could be fun, but never went into further detail about it since we both knew we wouldn't be going. Bob would tell me about his life and how lonely he was. He confessed to me his undying love for Lisa and said things like, "I can give her a much better life than her boyfriend, and if she would just give me a chance, I could make her happy." Lisa cut all contacts with him, and he was heartbroken. I told my parents about Bob, and they agreed that he was acting very odd. I asked them to talk to my older brother, as I thought he should have said something to Bob, telling him to leave me alone. He would always laugh when Bob scared me, so I pushed off the creepy vibes for months. By this time, I turned 18 years old. I once made the mistake of trying to joke. A man passed us at the smoke pit and asked if I was Bob's daughter. I said, "I might as well be." Big mistake. After this, Bob started giving me side hugs and eventually kissed the top of my head, less often than hugs. It even got to the point of him telling me he loves me. He would walk beside me and take my phone out of my back pocket, then compliment on how fast I reacted, saying, "I'd never grab your butt. I just wanted to see what you would do." A new lady around 36 started working with Bob in production, and he forgot all about Lisa and focused on this new lady. She now joined us on smoke breaks, and he would even drive her to the store after work since she didn't have a car. She also had a rough patch with her boyfriend, which made Bob complain the same way he did about Lisa. My older brother quit, and my younger brother took his place. He would join us at the smoke pit, but eventually stopped going because he didn't like smoking. I asked him what he thought about Bob. He said he was extremely creepy. I agreed. On Halloween, the new lady and I both dressed up. Bob took our pictures on his phone. He even made our picture his lock screen. I just thought he was using me as a way to have a picture of her, and he wanted her on his lock screen, not me. When the new lady stopped working at the business, Bob was heartbroken again. He told me that he tried to keep in touch with her, but she just blocked him with no warning. He turned back to Lisa. She would sometimes smoke with us, but not nearly as much as she did before. When we walked down the hall, he would make sexual jokes to her. From what she told me, he would make jokes to me too, but not nearly as sexual, so I never caught on. She stopped talking to him again. I told my boss and coworkers that I was joining the Air Force soon and would quit a month before basic military training so I could enjoy time with my family. I mentioned this to Bob once. He acted like a proud father and gave me life advice that I didn't pay attention to. I had enough of him sexually harassing my coworker and giving me the creeps. My boyfriend was also joining the Air Force and wanted me to quit my job sooner than I planned. 2 months before my scheduled BMT date, Bob brought up the date idea again, but this time without Lisa being invited. He said that we could watch movies in his apartment and he would buy me whatever alcohol I wanted. If I fell asleep, he would put me in his bed and he would sleep on the couch. I told him that my parents would never let me sleep at an older man's apartment, and my boyfriend would be super upset. He told me to lie to them about where I was going. I declined. He also thought that when I was on leave, I would go back to his work and surprise him. His logic? I know his work schedule. He honestly thought that we were so close that I would go out of my way with the limited time I had with my family while I was home, just to go back to where I used to work so I could smoke a cigarette with him for 10 minutes. Yeah, right. I complained to my parents again about Bob, and they told me to quit the next time I worked. They agreed to help pay for anything I wanted to do before BMT when the money I had saved ran out because they wanted me happy and out of Bob's life. It was 2 weeks before my boyfriend left for BMT, so quitting at the time would be perfect, so I could spend the next 2 weeks with him, which is what I did. I texted my boss and told him about Bob and how he made sexual jokes to Lisa and how he made me uncomfortable. He said he never heard anything about it before, and I should have told him earlier. Since I was quitting and would no longer be in that building, he couldn't go to HR to complain. Bob texted me the night before I quit. I gave short, dull answers. He asked me if everything was okay because I wasn't my usual self. I blocked him on Facebook that night. The next day I went into work and was in the cafeteria taking out the trash. I see Bob talking to Lisa, showing her something on his phone. Then he came over to me. I quickly grabbed the large garbage bags so I could use them as an excuse to leave. He told me that he changed his lock screen because I was leaving soon. His exact words were, "Your eyes tell a story." It was my senior picture from almost a year ago. I was 17 in that picture. He had to scroll through my Facebook just to find it. I told him that it was nice and that I had to get on with work and walked away. The next day I went back to return my badges and keys. I went to Lisa to ask her if she noticed how creepy Bob had been, since I thought I was the only one that noticed. I wasn't the only one. She went off about how he was sexually harassing her, and she laughed awkwardly to get away from it. She said, "Ever wonder why I stopped going on smoke breaks with you guys?" I told her about his love for her. She was grossed out. She then said something that made the whole last year that I've been working there come together. I think it was you all along. She thought when Bob was complaining about his love for her, he was really talking about me. She showed me a text from him the night prior. I didn't come into work today because of OP, because it hurts that I can't text her anymore, and so on. My brother told me that Bob was out of work for 3 days before finally going back. I did unblock him for a day to see if our messages would still be there, to show my boss, but they weren't. I did get a message from him apologizing if he upset me in any way because Lisa told him that I quit because of him. He was asking if it was true. In his mind, I was like a daughter to him that unexpectedly blocked him and quit to get him out of my life. I'm sorry this isn't a very climatic story, but it still creeps me out to think about how this old man groomed me, from poking my sides to slowly leading up to hugging me, kissing my head and telling me he loved me and texting me every day. I wish I would have followed my gut instinct and stopped talking to him sooner, but I really wanted those cigarettes. I'm just happy I had enough common sense to not go to his apartment and drink with him. He lived over the bar that my mom's friend works at. She told me that he showed her a picture of me once, telling her how proud he is of me joining the military. Hey everybody, it's Mr. Spook. First, I would like to say thank you to Mortis Media for allowing me to collaborate with him in this video. Secondly, I would like to talk about a little bit about my channel. I narrate mainly creepypasta stories, but some true stories. I am newer to the narrating scene. I started about 4 months ago, and if you'd like to check out my content, I'd definitely appreciate that. Again, thank you Mortis, and thank you everybody for getting to this point in the video, and I hope you have a great day or night.